Thank you very much for putting all this together at a very busy time. And Robbie Wood from Art and Ceramics is speaking today, and his topic is Modest Math Professor Had an Eye for Clay.
I hope the title does it justice. You'll see what I'm talking about in a second. Very interesting story to me, especially how all the stories go together like a movie. So I'll start off with talking about World War II. No, skateboarding. Hey guys. Oh, not in the answer to the phone.
No.
So imagine it's World War II and a bunch of guys are on a ship, not the Indianapolis, by the way. Similar though, I wanted to make sure someone's going to ask if it was the Indianapolis, but no. A fellow named Peter Voulkos, one of the most famous clay potters. He's called the most famous Greek potter of all time because he happens to be Greek in heritage, but he was fully American. This is how that story evolves. He's on the ship delivering the bomb to the Enola Gay, basically, to one of the planes. And the bomb is going to be dropped in Japan, one of them. I don't know exactly which one this was. I don't think he knew, because no one knew what they were doing. He didn't even know what he was doing. This story got told later to me by John Balistrieri at Bowling Green State in Ohio. So the bomb gets dropped. They're on their way back, not knowing what they had just delivered. You know, they knew they were on the ship and they were delivering things. And coming back to the States. And Peter Voulkos is now on his journey to be educated in ceramic arts, which he had no idea this was going to happen, on the GI Bill. That's key to all of this. Like the whole key to my existence in ceramics is the GI Bill because of the ceramics and art programs being built after World War II. At the same time as that bomb goes off, there's a family pulling a small Japanese kid named Jun Kaneko, very famous, now American success story in ceramics and art in general, money-wise, and just the success rate is phenomenal. And his family is pulling him up a mountainside to escape the explosion that's happening. It's a spine-tingling good story if you hear it told just right, and how these paths got crossed. Years later, and this will happen later in the talk, Jun Kaneko comes to America to study art. He ends up studying with Peter Voulkos, first student Paul Sulmer, and they become lifelong friends. And tremendously successful, but this story happened this weird shaped way. It looks like a pot. So, Fred Marr. I can't tell the story about Fred Marr unless I tell the story of how Peter Voulkos and the Otis group got started in clay, which that book that's going around is a story in writing that you can't find on the web hardly. Gets started. So this bowl, Fred Marr happens along an art show. He is a math professor, like I said, but I'll get to that in a second. But I'm going to leave this slide up for a second. So when I refer back to this simple bowl, which is not groundbreaking or anything, this is basic studio pottery. This is the bowl that I'm referring to. It's my first slide because this is what started Fred Marr's collection. He went to an art show, bought this bowl, which he never really bought things that he didn't need. When he was a kid, it said he couldn't rub two nickels together to buy a piece of candy. And he was very frugal, and then he ended up buying a bowl, which he didn't need, and ended up going to an art show after that, and this is how it started. That really fast. I'm trying to get to a specific slide. Oh yeah. Small disclaimer. As I wrote this up for you guys over the past few weeks, I got a new piece of software called Dragon. And I'm learning how to use it, but sometimes I don't catch all the mistakes that it makes, such as Peter Voulkos, which is kind of a strange word, is won't you come in? And so if I make any weird spoken word, written word deletions, please just ask me to clarify. But I'm going to start off with how the Otis group got started, and then I'm going to go into Fred Marr, which they can't be separated. Fred Marr and the Otis group are intertwined. To discuss one, the others come into the description. To discuss the Otis group, one starts with the leader, Peter Voulkos, who I just referred to, and then the chief patron, Fred Marr. During a time when abstract expressionism was making New York the focus of the art world, put in perspective of the 50s and Picasso in Spain and all these things are happening, and abstract expressionism is taking off in America. It's a new American version of things. New York was the focus of the art world at this time. There was a group forming on the west coast of the United States, down in Southern California, led by Peter Voulkos. This was the Otis group, as it came to be known. It was started by Volkas. He was the first ceramic instructor hired at LA City College, which came to be known as Otis Parsons School of Design, some of you may have heard. He was hired to begin the ceramics program at what used to be called LA City College, which I just said. And now it's called the Otis Parsons School of Design. On his first day on the job, he showed up into his classroom. Think about how this would affect you if you showed up to your classroom and there were no students. No tables, no chairs, no equipment, and no students. He was sitting on his desk that he had in there, waiting, wondering, and poetically, this is how it's told to me, a shadow fell across the doorway, like in the movies. And that shadow was from his first student at Otis, Paul Soldner, coming from Colorado. Pete and Paul began working on tables, number one, and I'm trying to decide where to get clay to start this program. This was a graduate program, so all the people coming in already had a bachelor's experience. It's not fundamentals. They began working on building equipment. Slowly, students began to come from around California, and as the word spread from the United States and then abroad, to be a part of the movement that was happening. Led by Volkas, who challenged the notion that clay as a medium was for utilitarian use only, he was shattering that notion, was very attractive to many, especially younger students. It was criticized harshly by the establishment and academia. The traditionally conservative ceramics applauded, and it was applauded by other more accepting liberal viewers, liberal and accepting radical notions. The attraction was that the attitude in the studio was very American. This time in the 50s when Americanism and rugged individualism was still popular. They were each striving for their own individual visual identity. That's very important, not trying to copy Volkas. This is Volkas at that time. The work these artists were making was revolutionary. They treated the medium sculpturally, even with pottery forms. The leader of the group, Volkas, was the only abstract expressionist, the true abstract expressionist of the group. Each other one fell into their own styles that came to be known, such as California funk and post-pop and things like that. So, not to compare him to the Emperor of China, but he was like the sun and all the planets gravitated around him, or sunflowers would follow him as he happened by, like sunflowers. And they say that Ai Weiwei sunflower seeds, who I mentioned earlier, is kind of like sunflower seeds, and the sunflowers follow the emperor, and that's what all those seeds were about. Each Chinese citizen is like a seed. Most of the students who gravitated in this area became very, very successful, especially in universities around Southern California and Washington and Hawaii and around the world, and became very successful as well. My professor, Jerry Rothman, is one of his first group at Otis with Soldner. You'll see in the textbook. Jerry Rothman, I'll talk about quite a bit since I had firsthand experience. At the same time as the Otis group was taking root, there was a math professor, Fred Marr, who had taken a job at LA City College, and by sheer luck, coincidence, fate, went to an art show, not at the college, but an art show in Southern California. And he bought a bowl by Laura Anderson, to give away all the pictures. Sorry. So he bought this bowl. Something in him, as he went by, said, "You need to get this." And it was kind of an obsessive, compulsive, new, never before occurring event. Bought the bowl, took it home by Lauren. She was an established potter in Southern California, traditional studio pottery type, not groundbreaking in splitting or shooting their stuff or throwing it against the wall. I mean, it was basic things for utilitarian purposes, which is very important to delineate. He couldn't leave without purchasing it. A simple bowl, utilitarian, useful, not avant-garde or revolutionary, but it was unlike him to spend money, especially on something he simply wanted and did not need. That describes him at the time. He assumed this to be a one-time event. Buying this bowl, he could have never guessed how mistaken he would be. At another art show, at this time at LA City College, he had heard about the group in ceramics, and he was gravitating towards ceramics. He heard about this faculty show like we have here at this college, and he went to it, and he saw a piece by Peter Volkas. He wrote a small note on the piece, like a sticky note, attached it to the piece, saying he'd like to buy it. Peter Volkas wrote on the back of the note, "Sure, come on by anytime." And so he did. He went down to the studio, just like if any of you were to happen by the studio and want to get a piece, or something. He said, of course, just come on by anytime. So however, before he was able to retrieve the piece, it was stolen or taken or somehow was misplaced, and Pete said he would gladly make him another one. This led to discussion and what's going on in here and what's this all about. This led to Fred continuously stopping by the studio to see what was new in the studio. Kilns were being unloaded by all these grad students producing massive amounts of work, large scale work, new things that weren't simple bowls and coffee mugs and that type of thing. He continuously went by, bringing coffee, sometimes dinner, sitting in on the critiques, sitting in on discussions and having discussions and getting to know the artist plural. This friendship with Volkus and the rest of the students of Volkus had begun. The friendship and relationship and vantage point of Mar, being an outsider, now on the inside as a friend of this group, was an inside view of this movement that was taking place. In the ceramic world, it really was revolutionary, because before that, when students would make something, they would have a use or intended plan, or they would sketch out their coffee pot, and you need to learn these technical steps. But these guys were making coffee pots and maybe take a samurai sword and cut it in half, and flip it over and put it back together as an artistic statement. That's just an example. Who was Fred Mar? Fred Mar was born in 1908 in New York City. He began his college education on scholarship at Fordham University. Any New Yorkers know Fordham University? He moved to LA to go to graduate school at USC, where my professor went, from U of H. USC was a good place where Susan Peterson and Carlton Ball and names like that were established studio partners. He moved to LA to go to graduate school at USC, getting his master's degree in mathematics, all while working as a social worker, his first job, and briefly as a substitute teacher at Los Angeles Independent School District. He began a PhD program after that at UCLA, but he couldn't afford to finish. It was getting too expensive, so he needed to get a full-time job, and decided not to pursue his PhD. And so he took a math faculty position at LA City College, then to become Otis Parsons School of Design. So he was the math professor there, I think the chair of the math department for 39 years, from 1937 to 1976. That's quite a span. And once he started collecting this work, as I'll tell how that story goes, he took on second jobs, took on overloads, took on more substitute teaching in order to afford this habit that he created. So what he would do, he would go into the collection, he would go into the kiln room and see pieces that he liked that weren't going into the museums yet. These artists sometimes didn't know sure what they were trying was actually going to be something exciting. They were just trying a new idea. So there's a word that we use quite a bit, especially in grad school, and when you're teaching grad students or on the committees and they're being too rigid, you want to tell them to go and have fun. Any of you ever experienced, I'm sure some of you do, when you're in the middle of possibly an equation or in the middle of a lecture, you get in the zone and time kind of just evaporates away. And next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by and you're done and you have to realize, don't forget you have homework, you're trying to finish up in 5 seconds. But that happens in the studio quite a bit, and we're trying to tell them to play more and not worry so much about taking calipers and doing this, unless that's what their work calls for, and saying, you need to work like this, and maybe close your eyes and do it. Trying to find that way to reach the students to say, have more fun. So it's very rare that a painter is painting a painting and that somebody wants to talk about their palette, as because it's more interesting strokes than the painting that you're painting on. Or the clay debris that you leave on your table can be more interesting than what you're working on here. So I hope I don't offend students when I come up and say, it's perfect right there. But no, that's not what I'm working on. I'm working on this. That's my scraps. And we have to have that sympathetic magic and be able to spot that and teach them about wabi-sabi. So these things are happening. This Eastern influence and Eastern philosophy is in Zen Buddhism, and the Zen being the art part of Buddhism, seeping into the identity of the American macho and white t-shirts, cigarettes rolled up, blue jeans, and guys working hard, sun up to sundown, living on coffee beans as their source of protein. And that's what was happening in the studio. So this is called Walking Man. This is by Volkus, one of the first pieces. He said, these are my scraps, I'm going to put them together. Became one of the pieces that Mar bought. So in there, he would come up and he would say, what are you working on? To say Jerry Rothman, and I'm working on these soup tureens. They're smooth, yet they're rough. I'll show you a slide in a second. and he would say, I'll take that. And he would spend probably less than $100. Or if these artists, these first grad students at Otis Parsons, at the Otis Group, if they were looking a little thin, or if they were looking like they weren't eating enough or staying up too late, because midnight oil is the fuel for many fires, he would buy them dinner or bring them dinner. He'd have his wife cook dinner, and sometimes that would say, give me that piece, I'll bring you dinner, and things like that. Or bring a tin of coffee. So many nights were spent around a table area, and they would have kind of critiques, but not necessarily critiques, more discussions of art itself, not the art pieces, because they had this philosophy that speaking about a piece of art would actually take away from the piece of art, because once you have to speak about a visual object, sometimes it lost its whole point. Because a visual object, if we were able to write about them better, we would be writers as opposed to visual artists. And I was always taught, don't talk about yourself. Give a one-sentence explanation of your artwork. Let the art historians, the newspapers, let them make up the rest. And people make up all kinds of stuff. And it's great. I guess it makes it interesting. Once one of these students, as they moved on, once they got to be acclaimed or starting getting reviews or getting shows in galleries and they would get outpriced, he wanted to spend the money on them. He would think he'd done his enough for them, kind of as a patron, let their chips fall where they may. He's going to move on to the new, more exciting. A little bit about Marr as a kid. A joke that he joked, I copied his joke. He didn't have 2 nickels to rub together to buy a piece of candy. Why don't you save that and let the addition take place? He would go to the library often, and I try to teach go to the library. I got a report once that my students use the library 600% more than anybody else, but it's all because this book isn't online. And I don't know if they love it or hate it or what, but they do it. And so he would go to the library, and new books would get put on the shelves, and one of his treats in life was to read the book before anyone else had a chance to read it. So he would be the first to, before the book got put on, he would take it out of the librarian's hand and say, I'm going to check this one out. And they got to know him for that reason. Very similarly, that one of the students actually pointed out, this might have led to his idea that he would sit at the kiln. So they would open the kiln door, and you'd see the glory of the new fired stuff, hopefully not a big meltdown or worse. And they would not even have a chance to even see the piece, and he would actually, possibly to buy it, still tinging and warm from the firing. So we call it Christmas every Thursday, and I guess they called it payday. But he would possibly buy the piece at that particular time. No one had ever seen it, and some pieces had never been seen except if you go visit this collection. I'll talk about that in a second. So once they reached a point where they no longer needed to be patronized, or patronized in a positive sense, or coddled, or talking to them, wondering what their new direction is, and saying, yeah, you should do that. Kind of a motivational mediator between Voulkos also. And Voulkos was the type who led by example and not so by words. And Marr was the discusser. He would like to come in and have a dialogue and pontificate about why did you make that decision, or well, I thought it sounded fun to paint her in this scene as opposed to under this palm tree, why maybe with the dog over there, whatever it was, and then rip it in half and separate them again, and the psychology behind it, or why, and discussing those things. Where Voulkos would say, now make it again, in the studio pottery sense, resolve it with working, resolve it with talking, kind of almost as if he's a side instructor in the area. And this is all on his time off from his full math load as chair of the math department. So all these discussions would lead to him knowing the artists intimately, as you can know them, but more than the gallery directors or the people in the newspapers writing about it, or the critics as they got to know him. One particularly famous critic, Garth Clark, from London Royal College, was in London at the particular time this was happening, doing his studies. He got accepted to the Royal London College, actually where Ross Brighton went to school, and went there and was studying art history and learning about the traditional studio aspects, what's going on in Britain, and all the European artists that they would learn about, just like us, you're learning about us. He heard his instructor came up, and he was really wanting to know what's new. He was not worried about what was old. He mastered that. I mean, that was his thing in grad school. He wanted to know what's happening now. the instructor came out and says, look at this show that's happening. There's a show going on that they put on across the street from the college called the Ferris Gallery. A lot of these artists started showing in what's called the Ferris Gallery. I think it only was open for a year, but they would have these one-man shows and the ability to see their stuff on the wall, just like down in the gallery right now, which was super fun opening it. Did you like it? I really liked it. I mean, if you guys want to come after the talk, I'll play the instruments for you. Show me how to play them. If you guys want to come see that, is it worth it?
That's good.
Oh my goodness. And I'll side note. If you're interested, I'll walk over there and I'll stay over there until midnight if you want to. But I have puppies to feed. Anyway, this is how this all happened. He really loved going to the studio. He really loved getting to know the artists. We're in the same division, math and art. We're together for a reason. And I think once you get past the basics in ceramics, once you get past the basics in math, which they're all terrified of, you know, nobody wants to leave ceramics and go to math class, but I'm saying you have to. Go learn it, you know. I want you to take ceramics too. You can't do this without it. So they finally, I'll say, you know, go talk to them. Go talk to your instructor outside of class time. I don't know if any of them have ever taken you up on it. I have one, I think, in Bill's class, Eric Reiner.
Yeah, I know her.
He's a good student. Take it easy on him. I'm just kidding. No.
He's in, he had me for Cal 2, he's in my Cal 3. Right?
Yeah. He's one of my great success stories. So if you ever want to talk about Eric Reiner, I'll talk all day long about him. Trying some just big stuff, and can't say enough good things about him. So, back to Paul Soldner, the first student. Once he graduated, he went to teach at Scripps College, at Claremont Graduate School. So Claremont, anybody know Southern California? Claremont is this beautiful area. It's kind of like the Garden of Eden where you walk to class picking oranges off of trees and go to class, you know, wipe your hands off. It's very neat. I don't want to try to get anybody down to Southern California. This might make you want to go at least for a vacation. There's a new national park, Pinnacle, too, already. So after graduating...
That's where I went to graduate school.
Oh, at Claremont.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow.
I've got some oranges.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Well, just not really.
Oh. Okay, I came from Texas to there, and that was my view. There's orange trees on my way to go see this exhibit. Actually, I'll talk about that. I never knew you could pick fruit. California's awesome. But let me go ahead. After graduating, Paul Soldner went to Scripps College and to teach at Claremont Graduate School in California. He started building the ceramics program up there, which was already pretty big, but he started really bringing it up and started having a national ceramics survey at the gallery there and all these. And when did you go there?
Oh, not too long ago.
Goodness gracious.
Well, I did notice that Scripps College published this, and it was a question I had for later. But
Oh, yeah.
please.
Okay. Yeah, my brain's swimming about what you may have seen. So at Claremont, and he started building up the ceramics program, and it's an unbelievably serendipitous thing happened there for his career. Literally, I'll tell that real fast. And then I'm going to get back to Jun Kaneko if I forget where I was, or say Jun Kaneko or say Japan in Japanese. Anybody ever heard of the word raku?
Yeah.
So in ceramics, raku is this great, fun process that we teach them, and they get to have the results in an hour type of thing. It's the microwave of hamburgers for students. And traditional Japanese technique. So in old Japan, in samurai Japan, in haiku Japan, you know, think back 17th century, and when raku was first developed. Raku is this ancient formal tea ceremony, part of ceramics. So they would have a tea bowl already fired, they would have a plate already fired, and they would invite all of their friends, whoever they were, whatever degree of status they were, whoever was invited. They would walk along the paths, you know, they didn't have cars, and they probably didn't have horses. I gave a talk in China, and the first question out of everybody's mouth was, how old was my horse? And they had never seen a horse, and it wasn't my horse, it was just in a picture. And so they're walking along, and they go on their way to the kiln shed where they're going to have the tea ceremony, to the tea house. There's a kiln built up bricks to do a raku firing. They're supposed to observe nature. So part of Zen Buddhism, you know, is nature and noticing that small thing that occurs. Like if you happen to see a deer on the way to work, I mean, is that exciting for some people? Or a fox goes across the road in front of you, hopefully in front of you, and hopefully you see it pass by. Roadrunner on campus. Some of you have seen the Roadrunner on campus.
Oh,
Or some of these things will make your day. You'll remember it. And you want to tell all your kids about it when you get home. Or a puppy yawning when you hold it. Or catching a snowflake on your tongue. Or you happen to notice that one yellow leaf that hadn't fallen off yet and had a red spot on it. Okay, things like that for the haikus. So they would go and they'd write things about this in a ceramic pigment on these already fired dishes. The ceramicist, the potter, would take those and fire them up to red hot. They would take those out with some metal tongs and they would douse them in water. Okay, it's a real formal tea ceremony. These guys in the 50s were getting into Zen Buddhism, and the 60s are coming up, and Zen philosophy, and the Eastern and Western, the mysticism of all that coming in. And so they were wanting to get in on how does that work, wabi-sabi, and embracing accidents as they happen. So this is the epitome of all accidents. Paul Sollner is showing his students the traditional technique of doing raku firing. So he takes the piece, he pulls it out, and he has his glazes on it. He's walking to they have a koi pond. Did you happen to see the koi pond over there?
It's Scripps.
At Scripps.
Yeah.
So there's a koi pond. He's taking the piece. It's just feet away, maybe where Tracy is. He's walking along, and he drops it. And he drops it right into a pepper leaf. There's pepper trees everywhere, and eucalyptus, and all these trees. It's Mediterranean, West Coast. Eucalyptus is very popular. But this pepper tree had a big batch of leaves. He drops it in the leaves, and it catches on fire. So instead of worrying and putting the fire out, he wants to get the piece and finish what he's showing him. So he takes the piece and he puts it down on the ledge around the koi pond, which is where they used to douse the pots, right there with the fish. And he notices that it has these bright silver flashings and metallic areas, and he's looking at it and he's just dumbfounded at how did this happen. And he puts, literally, light bulbs are going off, stars are going off, and he made this. Any of you ever had that moment when you just click and you realize all these things have led up to that? He realizes, I can repeat that. He comes up with this hypothesis, and I think this is exactly what happened. Pulls another one out, covers it in leaves. This led to the whole American version of raku. So the whole thing you see when they put it in trash cans and burn it and smoke it and put all these iridescent, real flashy and metallic things, that happened all because Paul Sollner dropped a piece on the way to doing it traditionally in this koi pond. It's a really neat story that I like telling the students and trying to reinvent the accident and say, this is how it happened. But you can't reinvent stuff like that. Just tell them the story. Tell them to go find more in the local library. Then place their hand upon the library door and say, this is where it is. So anyway, back to Jun Kaneko. Paul Sollner is doing all these great things. He's world famous. Now everyone's wanting to go study with Paul Sollner, who just passed away not long ago. I think 2 years ago, maybe last year. At I think 89, I believe. They all led really long, rich lives, and knew their status in the ceramics world before legends in their own time type of thing. God pigeons, if you watch Animaniac. So everyone's wanting to flock to study under Paul Sollner now. He discovered the American version of raku and he's a master raku fire. He's now being invited to Japan to show Japanese students how to raku fire, which, they all want to know their own history. In China, they want to know their own history, so we will teach them. Jun Kaneko, who I said was being dragged up the mountain away from the bomb, that Volcus had just delivered earlier in the story. If y'all missed that, I'll tell that later, if you're interested. Jun Kaneko lands at LAX. I don't know if any of y'all know LAX. I know it really well. I saw my family more when I went to school in California than I do now. But, so I really knew LAX well. It's different after 9/11 because you can't pull up the same way and wait and hold up signs that say their last name. Or you have to wait for them to come out to the loading zone. You can't go inside the scene. He picked up, Jun Kaneko was picked up at LAX by my professor, Jerry Rothman, who was a student who is now teaching at Fullerton, where I went to school at Cal State Fullerton. He was teaching there, and he was living in Laguna Beach, California. But Fred, he was going to be staying with Fred Marr at his house. Fred said, Jerry, can you go pick up Jun? He's coming in from the airport, and they had already met. So he went to the airport to pick him up, came back to LA, dropped off Jun Kaneko at Fred Marr's house. And his one-bedroom apartment, filled with this collection that just consumed the area. His wife only had a closet and the kitchen to call her own. The rest was just jumbled pots everywhere. It's very hard to be a potter's wife, and or a collector's wife, I guess. So the pots are everywhere. Just sculptures like this that are going to be world famous in the ceramics world, especially. But Volcus became a household name. He showed in Houston even in a while back. So all these pieces, sculptures, pots, things that he's collecting are in that bedroom apartment, jumbled, no organized reason. They're everywhere, they're stacked on top of each other. Junkaniko gets dropped off by Jerry Rothman at Fred Marr's house. Fred Marr comes out, station wagon's loaded, just like the Griswolds, minus the dog. Maybe, I don't know about the dog. Junkaniko, meets him, he shakes his hand, literally, and as he finishes shaking his hand, there's $200 in his hand. It says, "We're leaving for vacation," Fred Marr and his wife, to go to Disneyland or go to the Grand Canyon, wherever. I don't know where they went. Jerry's left back for Laguna Beach. Junkaniko's sitting there still with his hand moving with $200 in it. And Fred Marr drives off. He goes, "Here's $200 for you to eat on. Here's my house. Make yourself at home. I'll be back in a couple weeks." Junkaniko speaks no English, limited English that he learned in Japan, has these $200, goes inside, sees all this. So he spends the next couple weeks actually literally fondling every piece, getting to look at all these pieces that's been collected over the past few years, decades, and putting them down, making his notes, making his sketches. He hasn't worked at clay at this point. He's been a painter. He's come over to study painting at Scripps. And decides, you know what, I'm going to go to the hardware store with this money. Went and bought lumber. Came back to the apartment, constructed shelving units. And I guess Fred's wife probably really enjoyed this fact that she could walk in and not have to step over things. But he categorized each piece by the names that he found on them, and you could tell the genres, and you can see the growth. If you see artists now or as in their later works, you can see the growth if you come back to this collection and look how they first started. You can see the milestones, you can see the pivot points where direction changes happen, and you can see the path, how things happen, and all of a sudden, here's where you are. I mean, we all have that in our lives. We all got here by all these things that happen to us that have to happen in order for you to be a better person and lead to your thing. And hopefully you're all doing your thing. Hope you're not waiting. I don't know how many times I get told in the ceramics lab, I waited until I retired, but I can't move, I can't do that, but you just showed me because I've waited too long. Do it now, type of thing. So he constructed these shelves, got to know all this work, and he started forming his own ideas, and he had this painterly approach to everything. You've seen it from a 2D artist. Then he began making work at Scripps, and he got accepted without a bachelor's degree into the graduate program. Paul Sellner pulled the right strings, and he got accepted in, he worked for a while, built up his portfolio, and he got accepted into the graduate program, which isn't unheard of. But if your work's strong enough, that's what matters more than anything. Got accepted, and then he ended up graduating from Scripps College, also with a ceramics degree. But he would do his painterly approach to these 3D sculptural objects, which I'll show you some really terrific sculptural objects in the gallery if you're interested in touching some with your hands. I have a bow for you to play some things. I can't get over that show. I'm really excited. Let's see. Where was I? Junkaniko, after he does this, he gets his degree at college. He ends up going to Omaha, Nebraska, where he still is today. I think he accepts 3 apprentices a year. 3 apprentices, as one apprentice moves on in their career for their path that they're taking. He pulls in another one. He keeps 3 at a time, I believe. I'll show you a slide of Junkaniko's work in a second. I'll go through these slides. So large that they have to be built inside of the kiln the size of this room. And then they're picked up on a forklift onto a train or a truck bed, and then they're trucked out. Junkaniko is a success story like none other in American art, money-wise and status-wise. Palm leaves are kind of laid out in front of some people's feet as they take steps, and he's one of those, where people make sure there's nothing in his way. Because he's old now, they'll make sure, they're not going to trip on their way through your studio. It's not going to happen in your studio. I don't know. You get the point. The only other more famous or more successful potter I can think of in America, the closest thing in America to a national living treasure like they have in Japan, who are legends in their own time and recognized by the government as you're a living treasure. You're now, do your thing and show the world how, us. We don't quite have that here. We're working on things like that, the Smithsonian and all these things. Was Otto Heino. So if you don't know the name Otto Heino, he's part of this group, some on the outside. He's more the traditional potter, but he knows all these people at the time. But he's the type who made $25,000 per pot. Japanese artists waiting at the kiln to open for his pieces. There were Buddhist monks who were offering $1 billion, it's told, for a glaze recipe that he came up with. That was something they had lost over the centuries. He came up with a new yellow that he sold 5 gallons at a time for $75,000, 5-gallon bucket of glaze. And he kept it in his head, took it to the grave with him. No one knows it. He just died recently also. I got to know him, of all people, quite well, and Paul Sumner. But this recipe there was a bidding war in the millions and millions, up to they say $1 billion for this. But he would custom order Bentleys, and they would be driven up, and he would say, no, take it back, and things like that. But he's considered the luckiest potter in the world, not because of his money. You would never know he's like your grandpa that's wealthy that you would never know unless you knew because of the way they dress and talk, normal people. But in World War II, he was his name was changed to Otto and Heino, so we could pronounce it in America, Ellis Island type of thing. But he went to World War II also, just like all these other guys. And in World War II, he got shot down, I think 3 times. But he was a machine gunner, like Luke Skywalker in the bottom of the plane, and he was machine gunning and doing his thing, and they get shot down over, I think, Paris. Everyone's freaking out, we're going to die, and he goes to the back of the plane, kicks the door open, and jumps out of the plane on his last shoot down, hits a tree, tumbles down, and this French couple take him in, patch him up, send him back to the front lines, and they say, all right, you're discharged, and he's done, goes home. He starts taking ceramics classes, and then led to his thing. He had seen some ceramics in Europe, said, I'll try that. He was a milk, they had dairy farms when he was a kid, strong work ethic and all that stuff. I have some great stories about him. If you're ever interested in more, just come over to my office or call or email. I'll tell you a story. But really funny ones too. Dealing with thousands of dollars that he just says, oh, never mind. People breaking his stuff or melting his shoes in the kiln. Great stories. But the GI Bill, all these guys coming home from the war. I didn't mean to get off from that too far away. They didn't want to all go straight into English, math, science. They were taking those classes, of course. They were going to college on the GI Bill, but they were thinking, I need a break, so they would take an art painting class. When they got in ceramics, for some of them, it got them, just like I get some of the students, or I don't know, I can't kick them out of the studio sometimes, and you can't get rid of them. Like, you got to go to class. People will call me and say, why won't Johnny come to class? And I said, maybe yours should be more fun, more tangible. Jokingly, of course. But so the program started developing, attracting the people who, the greatest generation type, all the baby boomers coming home from the war. Or that was after the war. But all these guys coming home were taking classes, and they wanted ceramics programs, and they wanted art programs. U of H's ceramics and art program was in an old hangar where tanks were stored for World War II. It's gone now, but all that was all because of the GI Bill. All these guys coming home from the war, and the Korean War also wanted to take art classes, and programs were springing up where they weren't before. And just like the dot-com bubble, this big. So all that led to all this. Mars collecting these pieces, and for over 40 years that he's at LA City College. Getting along in age, as he was getting older. He died in 96, I believe, and that's the year I actually showed up there. And all this stuff was happening right as I got there. I was hearing the stories about Scripps College now having this collection, and got to go see it. It was new stuff, because everyone could see it for this reason. There was an earthquake, as there usually are in Southern California, and it broke lots of the collection, and he had to spend some time rebuilding the collection. Paul Sumner said to him, they're great friends, and really lifelong friendships that you can build up. He said, why don't you donate, part of the collection to the college, and we'll house it. It'll be insured, it'll be a safe place for it. The building's earthquake-proof. We build these things, I don't know if you've ever been through earthquakes. I have some great earthquake stories. Some dealing with dogs that knew it was coming and stuff like that. But getting on age, a couple earthquakes later, not knowing what to do with this amassed collection that he had, not knowing he was going to come up with the document, the documentary record of this collection. It's not documented in photographs like lots of things. Like the war, it can be documented with an embedded person, or certain movements happen, and you can document, you can find it. His collection is the proof of this evolution. It's a very important collection in that regard to send students to. So the stipulation was, and I think it started first with 900 pieces got delivered, then the rest of the collection. And he started more collections later in life as Pete moved on to Berkeley and Paul Sumner moved off. All these students that were his friends were moving on. He started going to Japan and visiting with Jun Kaneko, who was going back and forth and staying with him and building up a a Japanese ceramics and print collection. He started really getting into collecting, all based on how this all happened serendipitously. Important collections that people borrow from museums to this day. So at Paul's suggestion, let us house it. You know, we'll donate your collection to Scripps. We'll insure it and all that stuff. What was the stipulation for him doing that? Why would he agree to give this collection away? His whole thing was he was a teacher at heart. Any ceramic student, and I have one who just told me today he's going to California for summer break to go see this collection. You just go, you call them up and say, I'd like to come see the collection. That's the rule. They get the collection. If anybody, not just ceramics, but any student, any of you could go in and say, I would like to see this collection. I'm going to learn from this collection. They will open the door and take you in, and you get to handle all these pieces. You can't handle some of them. Some of them are too fragile, you can't replace them, any of them. But that's the rule. You get to go down in the basement, they open the door, and you get to go handle these pieces. It's fun. I went about 10 times. I was going to ask if you ever got to go later, or if you knew about it.
No, I didn't.
If you ever go back, I'll tell you how to do it. And if any of you go to Southern California and say, I want to go see the collection, call me day or night, I'll answer. Like Hillary Clinton, I'll be there. But I will. I'll say, yes, just go talk to so-and-so. Now I think it's T. Roberts, the other guy retired. He was there a long time also. But you can go handle these pieces or see them. You can open drawers. You can pick a piece up. You can feel the weight. This is how I tell the students. You can see why. You can feel how they made decisions. You can decide, all right, well, I get it. Because you're looking at it in 2D on the screen, it's not the same as picking up a piece. Looking at an image of a coffee mug is nothing like picking up a coffee mug and feeling the metal on your lips, the clay on your lips, or the metallic nature of a clay glaze, or the celadon. All those things matter. The tactile, all the senses are engaged in that particular respect. Fred Marr, this is from the newspaper. This is how they describe it. This is the paragraph summary of Fred Marr. Fred Marr, who built an extraordinary collection of contemporary ceramics, donated it to Scripps in Claremont, died of pneumonia June 6, 2002 at Kaiser Permanente Hospital. There's 96, in West Los Angeles. He was 93. That's quite a good age. Marr made his living as a professor of mathematics for 30 years. It's actually 40. Years at Los Angeles City College, later to become Otis Parsons. Fed his soul with avant-garde ceramics and intense intellectual relationships with the creators of the works that he purchased, which they don't get into, that he went in there and, it's too long of a story. But that's kind of the quick summary of him. Let me show you some of the pictures of stuff that he collected and the people, because they're intertwined. I don't mind this. This is the Walking Man by Volkus. This is Volkus working on a stack. These were pots at first, and he started with pottery, and he just gravitated towards sculpturally. Took some trips to New York. I can tell a whole different story on Volkus alone. All these guys had their own thing. But he would now take these big, giant vessel shapes that he started with and create what's called stacks and cut them, hack them, chop them, and then put them back together and create these pieces like this. So you can see the energy that gets put into it. This is him later in life. This is his first student, Paul Soldner. Paul Soldner would be in the studio and he'd be throwing these pots, and he was still dealing with pottery also. And the evolution of his stuff is a fascinating story that I teach the students, how it happened, just like they're starting, what it could lead to. He would throw these giant things and he would leave and come back in the morning, and Volkus had thrown bigger ones, a couple inches taller, and left them next to his as a way to say, you're not there yet, kid, type of thing. But he wouldn't say anything. He would just outdo him in the morning, overnight, and in the morning he'd find him. And this is what you just saw kind of being thrown. This is the raku and the metallic things and the halos. This is the kind of slightly more traditional thing. He started putting lids and tops on them. All of a sudden, the lids became the pieces, and the pot got canceled out of the equation. Now we have these things that used to be kind of embellishments on the top that took over, and the evolution went that route. And so these giant things they'd start off as pots. He'd literally drop kick them and throw them on the floor and assemble these sculptures and hit them with paddles. And that was the later work. This is a sky pot by Jerry Rothman. He was inspired by all kinds of things, also from New York, like Marr. They were great friends, Fred Marr and Jerry Rothman. But he didn't collect them very long. I think he collected 30 pieces from Jerry, but then Jerry's stuff got too expensive because he was in the museums and being collected and all these things. But this is inspired by the Native American Navajo sand painters. You all know the sand paintings and things like that. But he would take big things of clay. He would do a sand painting and drop that clay on it and pick up the paint and then make a pot around that. So they're called sky pots. Then he'd go in with a tool and kind of in an abstract manner carve it. So abstract meaning, not you don't recognize it. You see things you slightly recognize. A little bit of sympathetic magic, perhaps like in a cloud or in the grain on the carpet or in wood. You see things and you embellish it. So if he saw a bird, he would go in and make bird or a face, and very Bauhaus. And these sky pots were his kind of start into abstract drawings. So this is John Mason, another one of them. And he would do these giant sculptures. These would be about this tall. Anybody ever watch the Rose Bowl parade when they go in front of they station the cameras in front of the Norton Simon Museum? If you ever get to go to the Norton Simon Museum, you can see these pieces, a lot of them. And they're giant X's, so he started playing with text in large form. There's another piece of text out there on. But then he would glaze them with these real flashy reds, the new commercial glazes. So part of being an artist and not thinking traditional pottery in this respect, in this particular instance. In ceramics 2 here, I'll teach them glaze calculations. How do you want to make red? Let's learn how to formulate that to where it'll turn red. And then these guys would say, I'm not interested in how to make that. I'm going to go buy it for $1 down at the store, and I'm going to come glaze it. I don't need to worry about how to get it. I just want it now. And so they could go buy it. And I was taught that way was, why make it? Go buy it for $1. Why waste all your time? Unless you want to teach people how to make it. Michael Frimkes, and he would also work in collaboration with Magdalene Frimkes, also his wife, but he would make these pots, very traditional, conservative shapes, and then do political drawings on them. Fred Marr really loved collecting these. In fact, after he donated the collection to Scripps, he went and retracted one of the pieces to put back in his home later in his life because he missed it too much, but it was one of Michael Frimkes' pieces. This one's called Jumping Over the Moon. It's political stuff. Feel free to look it up and look at all the angles of it and read about it. Frimkes, if you're interested. If you forget, just email me. Ken Price, one of my big inspirations. He was a Southern California guy and just died recently, very recently. But he would go down to Mexico on surf trips, and he was the surfer of the group. They all would go to the beach. This is, right there in Hollywood, LA area. And, that was when all the beach movies are being made, and surfing's making its thing. He incorporated it into a lot of his analogies in class about waves come and waves go. You make a pot that's not good, put it back and let it recycle. Horizontal disposition for anybody in geology. I always teach the students, if you're going to make a piece that's going to last 1,000,000 years, make sure you want it around with your name on it for 1,000,000 years, potentially, unless you drop it. If not, recycle it and make a better one. Because when they come dig into our rubbish heaps and find your piece, that's going to be what recognizes us. So come see my wailing wall if you want to see what we do with them. If you ever have a bad day, come see my wailing wall. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just come see it. So he did these drawings and put these on pots. Very simple Mexican type things, and he would put them on 3Ds. And I just use this image to just kind of show what he was like. Henry Takamori is a Japanese fellow who was at Scripps with, and he ended up being one of my other professors at in Southern California. But he made figures and then painted the figures, or abstract shapes and painted figures on them. So these are life size. If you can give a scale, I'd probably about this tall to the figure there. So they're really big pieces, and played with the interaction between, just like two Barbie dolls, if you see a girl playing with dolls, or a kid with a doll on a toy, or a T-Rex in a car. The way you put them, if you face them away from each other, you get one narrative. If you face them together, you get a different narrative. If one's facing one and one's facing away, you get another story. So he was playing with those types of ideas. People at the beach, lots of these sunbathers. So this whole room would be filled with all these stories going on. All together, they say one thing, individually they say another. That's a picture of him next to one of his pieces. Like I said, you can't separate the work from the person that made the work, but you need your work to stand on its own. You can't you don't want to sell your work because of you. You want it to sell because of itself. It's a fine line. Juki Nikos pieces, look at the size of these. So that's a kiln. You can see all the individual bricks. All these are bricks. It's a big dome, honeycomb, beehive kiln. And the kiln would then be fired. You can see all the exit holes here to be the flues, all the chimneys. amazing stuff. Giant pieces that had to dry for an entire year before you could fire them to keep the cracks down. Unbelievable success story. This is Adrian Sachs, a very flamboyant type of potter. This is another text teapot. So the teapot doesn't have to be like you're across the street having Chinese, or if you're having tea and crumpets. It's not the traditional thing you think of teapot. They were expanding the idea. I'm going to do teapots, but I'm going to push, what can a teapot be? So this is an example of how we push it. You taught it at UCLA. That's what you were talking about. This is one of Jerry Rothman's soup tureens. That's one of my professors I mentioned. This is a soup tureen that would balance or juxtapose smooth and rough. So you'd have the smooth, and then you would have the extremely rough, and all part of the same piece. Not really utilitarian. They weren't worried about utilitarian work. They were worried about the sculptural visual impact of the work. If you could use it, that's great. If it didn't matter. If you could use it, it might have been not great. They would poke holes in it, maybe, or drill holes in it, just to take that utilitarian out of it. So there's a fine line between functional, non-functional, utilitarian, non-utilitarian. So if you don't know the difference, if I had a coffee mug, I can use it, it's utilitarian. If I had a coffee mug and a pure stick with holes, I cannot use it, it's non-utilitarian, but it's still a coffee mug, because I can say this is a coffee mug, but it has holes in it. So it functions as a coffee mug, but it's not utilitarian. This is the collection down in the basement, how it looks, how it's housed, numbered. There's, you can find pieces very easily. Students can come up and down the aisles. There's drawers of pieces you can just go through. Like if you go to a gallery now, there'll be a top where you can see some of the pieces on display that they might cycle through. You can go through drawers and more of it. There's always more. I think 1,500 total now. Stuff on the wall, large pieces, just more right there. Fernkiss here. He bought what he liked. If he didn't like it, he didn't buy it. If he spoke to him, he says, I'll buy that, I want that. But if they got too expensive, he said, you're doing well enough, you don't need me to buy it. And then more of the pictures. So all of my instructors are in this collection, which I got to go see them and say, my instructors in this collection, and learn it the reverse way around, back door in, which was a fun way to learn it. This is a picture of Paul Sellner's graduate pieces, the ones that he threw, and then Peter Volkes would come in and throw taller. So he made them really extra tall, and made them, they're called floor pots, because you can't put them on anything, they're too tall. And they would, you could barely get them into the kiln or into a room. And that's Sellner here, John Mason, and then Peter Volkes. Peter Volkes, again, like the God Pigeon, just the focal point of the show. Fred Marr was attracted to him just like everyone else, and wanted to know what was going on, and lifelong friends. Volkes again. And then I did not find an image of Fred Marr, so I took that out of the book that just went around, just so you could see a picture of the man himself, because this talk was about him. Very basic guy, I'm assuming Clark Kent type. Amassed this giant collection, accidentally got into it, donated it. It's an educational tool that's just ongoing. And that's it. That's all. If you have any questions, I can answer them. I'll go back. Turn the lights. I can wake you up. Any questions?
Did he ever make his own stuff? Or did
Never
he-
touched clay. As the story goes. Never had the compulsion to go in and make something. I don't know if he ever did or not. That's all we know is the stories we're told. Never touched clay. This was his role was collecting it. As if he went in and took pictures of it, kept a record of it, he bought it instead. I think it's fascinating. Anybody else?
I have a question. You can think of the art, more of the artistry in the glazing or in the forming of the...
Forming, and they would try to match the decorative surface to that form. It was all about form, every bit of it. But a lot of it, that's actually a good question. A lot of them gravitated towards, I'm not going to worry about what it looks like. I'm going to use spray paint instead of glaze. I'm going to get away from ceramic tradition. I'm going to use tar instead, or shoe polish, things like that. And if I'm not going to drink out of this or wash it or put it in the dirty dishes or put it in the dishwasher, why use that? I tell the students glaze is so you can wash dishes. That's why we add glaze to a pot. Firing it makes it watertight. Glazing it makes it where I can go in and clean it and you won't get sick the next time you use it. And so like Jerry Rothman and Volkes, they would do paintings with tar and spit and fire and all these things. bubble gum, just to not use paint, you know, to be different. And likewise, go back to some pictures. But some of them went that route. A lot of them said, well, I want to learn I'm going to get fancy with these glazes. I want to master the glaze part and use it to my sensibilities, like Adrian Sachs. Jerry Rothman ended up developing clay bodies, my professor, and glazes and all these things. Even, I think he worked in industry and made ceramic utilitarian pieces, cups and saucers. Every time I'd go to his house in Laguna Beach, he'd have parties or he'd bring me over to help. Because, you know, I was a struggling student. He would bring me over to move things, boulders to build walls. They would all hire me to mow their grass and stuff, thinking I needed money. And I was happy to go get the gas money. And but I would be able to ask questions. And Jerry Rothman would always say, cups and saucers, holding up. All this is from cups and saucers. You know, let me know it wasn't from the big sculptures. It was from the multiple stuff you could sell. It's very rare you sell a big piece, but the nicely glazed work you can sell if people can afford it. But some of them really went the extreme one way, and a lot of them went the extreme. This is the extreme of glazing, and this is the extreme of maybe acrylic paint or lack of glaze. This particular piece. That's actually a good question.
I don't want to be overly based with this, but what is a collection like that worth monetarily? I mean, obviously to you and artists around the world, it's priceless.
Right.
But as these individuals moved up and became famous and he no longer was their steward, what is that collection worth monetarily? In other words, for Hollywood purposes, right?
Right.
Here's a humble math professor, couldn't get through school because he couldn't pay his bills.
Right.
Unassuming math chair at a small college in, you know, California. So if there
I have
were-
no idea what it would be worth. And while he collected it, he didn't care about if it was going to be worth it. He bought it because he liked it,
Right.
which was how the story goes. He didn't worry about if it was going to be resellable. I think he might have sold a few because if they got bagged enough, we need that piece for our collection, all right, I'll sell it to you. But he wasn't trying to make a profit. I guess since it's insured now in the basement of this place, they have to have a monetary. That would be a great question to actually research. I've had students go visit it and stuff, and if I know if I'm going or if I go, I'm going to ask. I might even just contact them, and that'd be a great question. I wonder if they're allowed to. So that might be one of the things. I don't want to talk about how much this is worth anymore. I bet they have to know. That's a great question. It never comes up.
And a follow-up, I guess, really quick is like this piece right here. They must lend those pieces out from that museum, like you said, to the Smithsonian or other
Yes.
museums that they're indicative of that progression.
When this movement or anything from the Otis group was a popular group because they were such rugged guys and they were new to it. When there's shows of these people, they borrow from this collection. Yes, lots of times, and they're often not. Maybe when you go visit, you may not see a lot of them because they might be off. That's a big expense, is moving pieces around and how, you know, there's entire companies that sprung up off them about moving artwork. You know, companies that just move art, things like that, all because of the insurance. Yeah, that's a terrific thing. I wonder what the whole total worth might be. They have to have it for insurance.
So did these guys stay tight the whole time, or was there ever just like animosity amongst them, or a
I never
competition?
heard of any of them not liking each other,
Wow, that's great.
but a lot of times it's because they spread out geographically. So when you're not, I mean, in a small college, we might be all together and maybe you could grumble sometimes. I don't know. I go with everybody. But I think, but there were times, I guess, in the studio that were very competitive. And so, but nobody would open a kiln and crack work or, you know, nothing. Because if you open a kiln at the wrong time, I've had problems with that, with people wanting to look to see what was in there and not realizing that cold air is going to come in and ruin all of this. Then you know the monetary value real quick because you have to buy new equipment and shelves. And I tell that story a lot. You know, don't ever open it. I even had a chain kiln shut before back in school because people would look. But I've never heard stories of any negativity. I get some slight jealousies, but if people weren't cutting it, they were kind of like the run of the litter guy. Just kind of, they realized, you know, I'm not keeping up. I'm moving on that way. But no one ever had a negative word to say that was part of it because they were part of it, and everyone wanted to cling to that they were a part of that. If they were, you know, there was really a big bragging right because it was accidental. No one knew how big everything it was, just being in ceramics world. But it affected lots of things, the world in general. Yeah, it was a real big deal to come up with your own visual identity and not try to copy anybody. If you got caught looking too much like so-and-so, you'd be called on it. It was a big group thing. So if I was looking like I was making stuff like Ron stuff, if he was in there making beans, or writing like Ron, I hope some, would say, you sound a lot like Ron. So that checks and balances. Natural evolution, like a pecking order. Out in the surf, there's a pecking order. There's pecking orders everywhere, and everyone knows how it goes.
Yeah.
Like dogs.
Well, thank you, Robert.
Thanks.
Thanks, Robbie.